Paul Murphy this morning showing flooding near Fleur-de-Lis and 40th Street in Lakeview. This is from around 8:30. Now the water either wasn't receding or was going down very slowly. Some of that flooding could be due to the pumps not working properly in that area. City Councilman Joe Giarrusso made a post online saying a turbine lost power just before 7 a.m. He says the pump station 12 serving West Lakeview went offline while a few others were running at diminished capacity. Now the Sewerage and Water Board just within the last 20 or 30 minutes says pump station 12 is now back online after some power issues, and the crews are working to bring back turbine 4 online as well. They say if no other rain falls this morning, crews believe the streets will be clear by noon. Of course, we know the city of New Orleans has had long-standing extensive problems with turbine 4 in particular. It has broken down multiple times over the years. WWL Louisiana investigator Katie Moore, who is also a member of the Down the Drain team, joins us now on the phone to give us more insight into the history of that turbine. Katie, we talk about turbine 4 all the time, but why is it such a big deal in New Orleans?
Well, it's a big deal because it powers a significant number of the pumping stations. And when you have that drastic of a drop-off in the amount of power that can supply to the pumps, then either you have to use those backup generators that were installed after our down the drain reports back in 2018, or you have to find an alternate source of power in order to get them going. They have to use what are called frequency changers in order to change the type of power that can feed the pumping stations using energy power that comes from the power company. So if you don't have power, you can't run the pumps. That's the bottom line. And so that's been the biggest issue that the Sewerage and Water Board has said has been happening this morning. So, when we look at the overall picture of what's happening with flooding across the metro area, that is always the number one question. It's what caused us to first start looking into the situation when we first did down the drain, because we wanted to figure out what was the problem with the pumps. Is it the pump stations not working, or is it the power? And we discovered it was, in fact, the power. Turbine 4 has been a large source of problems, a huge money drain for the Sewerage and Water Board as well.
Yeah, we're talking, tens of millions of dollars just to fix the thing. What is it about the turbine, the power source here, that is the problem?
So it has needed tons of repairs. The issue with the Sewerage and Water Board's drainage system is that it uses a somewhat antiquated type of power to run the pumps. It was revolutionary when the system was first designed back at the turn of the century. And that was incredible engineering. However, it has not kept up with the times. And so the type of power that comes from, say, energy and other sources of power is different from what's generated by those turbines. And those turbines can generate a ton of power to supply the pumping stations, but if they go down, the Sewerage and Water Board is often left scrambling to try and find power to sufficiently power all of those pumps that need to be operating simultaneously to keep the water out of the street. So they've tried to repair it. They have sunk a lot of money into it over the years. There have been a lot of people calling for a drastic transformation in the power systems of the Sewerage and Water Board during that time. But it is extremely expensive, and it is a major infrastructure investment. So I think that they have really tried to put some redundancy in the system by adding those backup generators. But over time, it's going to come to a point where the Sewerage and Water Board is going to have to ask itself, what are we going to do moving forward in the future, and how do we secure the funding to really modernize this system?
When you talk about those repairs during your investigation into this, have you seen any repairs that have actually proved to be beneficial long-term, or have most of them been more of like a Band-Aid type fixture?
Well, I think they were hoping that the repairs that they have done to these turbines would be a more permanent type fixture. I know that the EMDs, when those were installed, they were supposed to be, like I said, the redundancy in the system. So if not all of those are powered up and working today, that could pose a significant problem in that redundancy factor. And so I think that those were meant to be a real backstop and a permanent fixture until they can, again, fully modernize the system. But in the meantime, they've had to just piece it together. And I don't think that the repairs that were done were intended to be temporary. I think they were intended to be a more permanent fix. And it took a long, long time for them to get the system back to where it was before we saw this breakdown today. So there are going to be a lot of questions asked.
Exactly. And even those backup generators that you were talking about, those can only operate to a certain capacity, right?
Right. I mean, there were 5 of them that were installed. They were very expensive when they put them in. They're very loud for the neighbors. We've done some extensive reporting on that over the years. But, you know, if all 5 of them are not able to work, or if they're not turned on necessarily, then that could pose a problem if the Sewage and Water Board doesn't have enough power. And then, you know, there's also a manpower piece of this. They have to have the staff in place in order to, say, turn on the frequency changers, which are the things that change energy power into that older, more antiquated type of power that they need to run the pumps. They use what's called a frequency changer in order to change the frequency of the power, but somebody has to turn them on. You know, they need a human being to go turn them on. So those are among the many, many questions I think that people are going to be asking the Sewage and Water Board. Of course, we saw Joe Giarrusso posting this morning about the problems. He's really been a voice for these issues and keeping close watch on the Sewage and Water Board since we did those investigations in 2018. So, you know, I think he's going to be asking a lot of questions, just like many people are. Now, one of the pumping stations that was also affected in this situation this morning, because of the lack of power and the diminished capacity to send power, was pumping station 6. And we normally focus on Orleans Parish in these situations, but there was significant flooding in some parts of Jefferson Parish this morning as well. And pumping station 6 is that pumping station that's on the Orleans-Jefferson Parish line, and it feeds both Orleans and Jefferson parishes. So if this situation was affecting pumping station 6, there's a good chance that also affected Jefferson Parish residents and contributed to some of the flooding that we saw this morning. I know there was about a foot of water in the Maple Ridge subdivision this morning that tends to flood whenever we do get strong storms like we got overnight. But that's something to be aware of, too, and I imagine Jefferson Parish will have some questions for Orleans Parish as this moves forward.
And you brought that up. Actually, Councilman Scott Walker had posted about that very issue with that pumping station affecting parts of Jefferson Parish, so we do know that that actually did happen because of that pumping station. WWBL investigator Katie Moore, appreciate your insight on this and giving us some context on those pumping stations.
No problem. Happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, Katie. And our poll